Her lawyer wrote to her, "Call me immediately." He told her the terrible truth about her millionaire husband. Today's intro is not longer because many of you left the story early, and it truly hurt my hard work. Hi, my beautiful family. This is your brother, Mr. Peter. From the depth of my heart I pray, may the heavenly God bless every woman here with honor, peace, and endless love. May every sister and mother be covered with dignity and joy, and may every child of this family grow in light, blessing, and protection. These stories I create are written only with love for you, my family. Your support is my strength, and your love is the heartbeat of this channel. Please watch with your whole heart, like and comment, because together we are one family forever. If your heart is true, write, present. If your love is real, write, I am with Mr. Peter. Love doesn't knock politely at your door. It breaks down walls, floods your soul, and rewrites your destiny in the language of forever. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the silk sheets as Layla Rose Wright stirred in her husband's arms, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. 3 years of marriage, and still her pulse quickened every time Liam whispered her name like a prayer against her skin. This moment, wrapped in warmth and devotion, felt like the entire universe had conspired to bring them here, to this perfect sanctuary they'd built together in their penthouse above the chaos of Manhattan. The city stretched out beyond their floor-to-ceiling windows like a canvas of infinite possibilities. But Layla's world had narrowed to this sacred space, the rise and fall of Liam's chest beneath her palm, the way his fingers traced lazy patterns along her bare shoulder, the morning light catching the gold flecks in his emerald eyes when he looked at her like she was the most precious treasure he'd ever discovered. "Good morning, my beautiful wife," Liam murmured, his voice still thick with sleep as those fingers found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. His touch sent shivers of pure electricity down her spine, even after all this time together. The familiarity of his caress only made it more powerful, like a symphony she'd heard 1,000 times, but that still moved her to tears with its perfect beauty. "Have I told you lately that you're absolutely perfect?" he continued, his lips brushing against her temple with butterfly softness. "That you're the answer to every prayer I never knew I was saying?" Layla's heart swelled with the kind of profound love that felt too immense for her chest to contain. At 32, she'd thought she understood the full spectrum of human emotion, but Liam Wright had redefined every feeling she'd ever experienced. He looked at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe was real, loved her with an intensity that left her breathless and grateful and utterly consumed by the beauty of their connection. "I love how you look at me," she whispered, pressing her lips to the hollow of his throat, tasting salt and devotion and the faint trace of the cologne that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Like I'm the only woman who's ever existed in the history of the world." Liam's hands cupped her face with the reverence of a man touching something sacred, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The emotion in his eyes was so pure, so complete, that it took her breath away every single time. "Because you are," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "You're my religion, Layla, my prayer, my salvation, my everything that matters in this life or any other." Their love story had begun like something from a fairy tale, a chance, meeting at a hospital charity gala where she'd been working as a volunteer nurse and he'd been fulfilling his family obligations as heir to the Wright Industries fortune. One look across a crowded ballroom filled with New York's elite, and both their lives had changed forever. He'd approached her with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, but had spoken to her with the reverence of someone who recognized true beauty when he found it. "Dance with me," he'd said that night, extending his hand like a prince from a storybook. And when she'd placed her hand in his, when he'd led her onto the dance floor, while 300 of Manhattan's most powerful people watched, she'd felt the earth shift beneath her feet. By the end of that first dance, she'd known with crystal certainty that this man would either be her greatest love or her most devastating heartbreak. promise me something," Layla said now, pulling back to search his eyes, those beautiful emerald eyes that had first captured her heart and held it captive ever since. "Promise me that no matter what happens in our lives, no matter what challenges we face, you'll always remember this moment. Remember how perfectly, completely we love each other." The intensity of her words seemed to surprise him, and Liam's brow furrowed with concern as he sat up, pulling her with him, his hands never leaving her skin. The morning light painted him in gold and shadows, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the worry now creasing his forehead. "Layla, what's wrong? You're scaring me. You sound like you're saying goodbye or preparing for something terrible to happen." She could see the fear in his eyes now, the same fear that lived in her own heart sometimes, when their happiness felt too perfect to last. Liam Wright had everything a man could want: wealth, success, a family legacy that stretched back generations. But she knew that losing her would destroy him as completely as losing him would destroy her. "I'm not saying goodbye," she assured him, though something in her chest felt fragile today, like crystal balanced precariously on the edge of a table. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. The thought of ever losing this, losing you, it would shatter me into pieces so small they could never be put back together." Liam's eyes blazed with fierce protectiveness as he gathered her closer, his voice dropping to that low, serious tone that always made her pay complete attention. "Listen to me, and listen carefully," he said, his hands framing her face like he was holding his entire world. "Nothing and no one will ever come between us. Whatever challenges we face them together. Whatever secrets the world tries to throw at us, we'll handle them side by side. You are stuck with me for the next 60 years, Mrs. Wright, whether you like it or not." His mouth found hers in a kiss that spoke of desperate passion and unshakable faith, of promises made in darkness and kept in light. When he kissed her like this, the rest of the world disappeared completely. No Wright family expectations, no society pressures, no fear of a future that might test the strength of what they'd built together. They made love with the desperate passion of souls who sensed change approaching on the horizon, pouring every whispered promise and silent prayer into each touch, each kiss, each breathless declaration of forever. Liam worshipped her body like a man performing sacred rituals, his mouth following trails of fire across her skin while she arched beneath him, lost in sensation and overwhelming emotion that bordered on spiritual transcendence. When he moved inside her, it felt like coming home and flying away simultaneously, like being completely known and endlessly discovered with each gentle thrust. They moved together in perfect synchronization, 3 years of marriage having taught them the intricate language of each other's bodies, the precise combination of tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and renewed, and more deeply connected than they'd been even moments before. Afterwards, as they lay tangled in silk sheets and golden sunlight, their breathing slowly returning to normal, Layla's hand drifted unconsciously to her still flat stomach. The pregnancy test she'd hidden in her makeup drawer seemed to burn like a secret fire. 2 pink lines that would either complete their happiness or complicate it in ways she couldn't predict. She'd been carrying this knowledge for 4 days now. 4 days of joy and anticipation, warring with uncertainty about timing and the future. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the past 2 years carefully preventing pregnancy while they established their marriage and careers. And now that she was finally ready to become a mother, the positive test had appeared like an unexpected gift from the universe. But something about the morning felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure, as if the happiness they'd built was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice soft with wonder and love and the trembling excitement of sharing life-changing news. "Something beautiful and terrifying and completely life-altering that's going to change everything we thought we knew about our future." But before she could form the words that would tell him about the baby growing inside her, her phone rang with a shrill electronic intrusion that shattered the intimate cocoon they'd built around themselves. The caller ID made her frown in confusion. Charles Morrison, the Wright family lawyer, calling at 7:30 in the morning when he knew they treasured their private time together. "Don't answer it," Liam said, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her forget her own name. "Whatever it is can wait. This moment belongs to us, and I'm not sharing you with the outside world for at least another hour." But something in the urgency of the ringing made her hesitate. Some instinct that whispered of trouble approaching. Charles Morrison had been the Wright family attorney for over 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to personal matters with the discretion that only old money could buy. He would never call this early unless something was seriously wrong, an emergency involving Harrison or Catherine perhaps, or some crisis at Wright Industries that required immediate attention. "I should take this," she said reluctantly, reaching for the phone with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy and uncertain. "It might be about your father or the company, something important enough to call this early." "Mrs. Wright." Charles Morrison's voice was tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. Urgency mixed with something that sounded almost like pity or dread. The formal tone sent ice through her veins, a sharp contrast to his usual warm, paternal manner. "I need to see you immediately, alone. There are matters concerning your husband that require immediate discussion." The words hit her like a physical blow, each one carefully chosen to convey maximum impact. In 3 years of marriage, Charles had always been warm and welcoming, treating her like the daughter-in-law he genuinely respected and admired. This cold professionalism was completely out of character, suggesting something so serious that it had stripped away his usual kindness. "What kind of matters?" she asked, pulling the sheet higher around her body as if she could somehow protect herself from whatever was coming next. "Charles, you're frightening me. What could be so urgent that it can't wait until normal business hours?" "Not over the phone," Charles said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of secrets too dangerous to trust to electronic communication. "Can you meet me at my office in 1 hour? And Mrs. Wright, please don't discuss this conversation with your husband until we've spoken. It's crucial that you hear what I have to say before making any decisions about how to proceed." The line went dead, leaving Layla staring at her phone with growing dread, while her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Beside her, Liam was watching with concerned eyes, reading the fear written across her face, with the intuitive understanding that came from 3 years of shared intimacy. "What did Charles want?" he asked, his voice casual but his body tense with the awareness that something had shifted in their perfect morning like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. Layla looked at the man she loved with every fiber of her being, her husband, her best friend, the father of the child growing inside her, and felt the first crack appear in the foundation of her trust. Why would Charles Morrison need to speak with her alone? What could possibly concern her husband that she wasn't supposed to know about? The questions multiplied in her mind like poison, spreading through clear water. He wants to discuss some legal documents," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was the first time she'd ever deliberately deceived Liam, and the betrayal of their honesty felt like swallowing broken glass. Probably just trust fund paperwork or something equally boring. But as Liam kissed her forehead and disappeared into the shower, humming contentedly as if their world hadn't just tilted off its axis, Layla clutched the pregnancy test hidden in her dresser drawer and wondered what terrible truth was waiting for her in Charles Morrison's office, and whether the love she'd thought was perfect was about to be revealed as something far more complicated and fragile than she'd ever imagined. The baby inside her seemed to flutter with movement, as if sensing the storm approaching, and Layla pressed her hand to her stomach while tears streamed down her cheeks. She'd been planning to share the pregnancy news this morning, to watch Liam's face light up with joy as they planned their future together. Now she wondered if there would be a future left to plan, or if whatever Charles Morrison had to tell her would shatter the fairy tale they'd built their marriage on. Chapter 2. The Lawyer's Call. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones capable of destroying us most completely, not through malice, but through the secrets they've buried so deep they've forgotten they're still bleeding. An hour later, Layla sat in Charles Morrison's mahogany-paneled office, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling as she studied the man who'd been like a trusted uncle to the Wright family for over 2 decades. Charles was 65, silver-haired and distinguished, with the kind of quiet authority that came from protecting wealthy families' secrets for most of his professional life. But today, his usually calm demeanor was cracked with something that looked like genuine distress. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Charles said, settling behind his massive desk with the gravity of a judge preparing to deliver a life-altering verdict. "I know this seems unusual, asking you to come without Liam, but what I'm about to share with you requires careful consideration." The office around them spoke of old money and older secrets, leather-bound law books that probably contained the histories of New York's most powerful families, oil paintings of long-dead judges who'd shaped the legal landscape, file cabinets that undoubtedly held confidential information spanning decades of Wright family business. Layla had always felt comfortable here before, but now the weight of accumulated secrets seemed to press down on her like a physical force. "Mr. Morrison, you're frightening me," Layla said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as anxiety clawed at her chest. "Whatever this is about, please just tell me. The suspense is literally killing me." Charles removed a manila file from his desk drawer, his movements deliberate and heavy with reluctance. She could see his hands shaking slightly as he opened it, revealing photographs and documents that would shatter her understanding of her marriage like a hammer through glass. 3 days ago, I received a call from a woman named Emma Sullivan. She lives in Boston, and she's been trying to locate your husband for the past 6 months. The name meant nothing to Layla, but the way Charles spoke it, with careful neutrality that suggested deeper significance, made her stomach clench with premonition. Why would someone be looking for Liam? He's hardly hiding from anyone. "Mrs. Wright," Charles said gently, opening the file to reveal photographs that would haunt her dreams. "Emma Sullivan is the mother of your husband's son." The words hit her like physical blows, each one landing with devastating precision in her chest. Son, Liam had a son, a child she'd never heard of, never been told about, a human being who shared her husband's DNA and had been completely erased from the narrative of their life together. "That's impossible," she said automatically, her mind refusing to process information that would demolish everything she thought she knew about the man she'd married. "Liam would have told me. We don't have secrets between us. We've talked about everything. His past relationships, his college years, his plans for children. He would never hide something like this from me." Charles slid a photograph across the desk with the careful movements of someone handling explosives. "His name is Gabriel. He's 8 years old, and he's very sick." The little boy in the photograph had Liam's eyes, those same distinctive emerald eyes that had captivated her from the moment they met. His hair was lighter, more like his mother's sandy brown, but the shape of his face, the set of his jaw, the way he held his head with that familiar, right confidence. It was unmistakably Liam's child. The resemblance was so strong, it took her breath away. "This can't be real," Layla whispered, but even as she spoke the words, she was seeing new meaning in things she'd dismissed before. Liam's occasional distant moods that he'd explained as work stress. The way he sometimes stared out windows with an expression she couldn't identify. His reluctance to discuss having children until recently, when she'd started bringing up the subject more frequently. Emma Sullivan was Liam's girlfriend during his senior year at Harvard Business School. Charles continued, his voice professorial but kind. According to her, they were deeply in love and planning to marry after graduation. She became pregnant during their final semester, but before she could tell him about the baby, Liam disappeared from her life completely. No explanation, no goodbye. He simply stopped returning her calls and moved back to New York. The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. Not just the existence of another woman, another child, but the casual cruelty of abandonment, of walking away from responsibility and love without a word of explanation. This wasn't the man she'd married, the man who brought her coffee in bed every morning, who held her when she cried, who'd promised her forever with tears in his eyes on their wedding day. Why is she contacting him now? Layla asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Didn't want to hear whatever additional pain was waiting in Charles Morrison's carefully controlled voice. Gabriel has acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Charles said softly, and the words hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and Emma has exhausted all other options. She's desperate, and she's hoping that Liam might be a match, or that there might be other family members who could help save her son's life. The room spun around Layla as the full scope of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. Not only did her husband have a secret child, but that child was dying, fighting for his life in a hospital while his father lived in luxury, completely unaware of the crisis. The cruel irony was almost too much to bear. She was carrying Liam's baby while his firstborn fought for his life in a Boston hospital. "There's more," Charles said, and Layla wondered how there could possibly be more. How the foundation of her life could sustain any additional damage without crumbling completely. Emma Sullivan hired a private investigator to find Liam 6 months ago. The investigator discovered that Liam has been sending money, substantial amounts, to a bank account in Boston for the past 8 years. "He's been supporting them?" Layla asked, her voice hollow with disbelief. "He's known about Gabriel all along." "It appears so," Charles confirmed, sliding additional documents across the desk. "The payments began shortly after Gabriel's birth and have continued monthly ever since. Always from a personal account Emma wouldn't be able to trace back to him directly, but consistent and substantial enough to cover living expenses and medical bills." The betrayal deepened with each revelation, layer upon layer of deception that painted her entire marriage as an elaborate lie. Liam hadn't just abandoned his college girlfriend. He'd been secretly supporting her and their child while building a life with Layla based on omissions and carefully constructed falsehoods. Every "I love you," every promise of forever, every moment of intimacy had been tainted by this massive deception. "Why are you telling me this instead of contacting Liam directly?" Layla asked, her voice breaking as the full weight of her shattered trust settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "She tried," Charles said, his expression heavy with sympathy for all the players in this devastating drama. "Multiple times over the past 6 months. But Liam's assistant has instructions to screen his calls, and apparently Emma Sullivan is on a list of people whose calls are never put through. She finally contacted me in desperation, hoping that as the family attorney, I might be able to facilitate communication." Layla stared at the photograph of Gabriel, this beautiful little boy who was fighting for his life while his father played house with another woman, building a fairy tale marriage on the foundation of abandoned responsibility. The child had Liam's stubborn chin and his thoughtful expression, and she could see so clearly the man he might become if he lived to grow up. "What does she want from him?" Layla asked, though she already knew the answer would break her heart even further. "Initially, just medical information and the possibility of testing for bone marrow compatibility," Charles explained. "But Emma also wants Gabriel to know his father before, in case the treatment doesn't work." The unspoken reality hung in the air between them. This little boy might die without ever knowing that his father was alive and wealthy and capable of providing not just medical help, but love and acceptance and the security that came with being acknowledged as a right. "Mrs. Wright," Charles said gently, leaning forward with the expression of a man who delivered difficult news to families for 40 years. "I need to ask you a difficult question. Did you have any indication that your husband might be hiding something this significant? Any strange behavior, unexplained absences, anything that might suggest he was carrying this burden?" Layla thought about the past 3 years, searching her memories for clues she might have missed, signs that the man she'd fallen in love with was carrying the weight of abandoning his firstborn child. But all she could remember was love, pure, devoted, seemingly honest love that had felt too good to be true. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but I thought I was just lucky to have found someone who loved me so completely." But even as she spoke, fragments of memory began clicking into place, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle she'd never known she was solving. The way Liam sometimes grew quiet around children, watching them with an expression she'd interpreted as longing, but now recognized as guilt. His reluctance to visit Boston, despite having friends there. The monthly transfers from his personal account that she'd assumed were charitable donations. As she sat in Charles Morrison's office, staring at the photograph of a little boy who looked exactly like her husband, Layla felt the first stirrings of the baby growing in her own womb and wondered if she was about to repeat Emma Sullivan's story, falling in love with a man who was capable of walking away from his children when loving them became inconvenient or complicated. The pregnancy test in her purse seemed to pulse with urgent significance, a secret that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the one that had just exploded her marriage. How could she tell Liam about their baby when she'd just learned he'd abandoned his first child? How could she trust him with her heart when he'd proven capable of such devastating deception? Outside Charles Morrison's window, Manhattan continued its relentless pace. Millions of people going about their lives while hers stopped completely, frozen in the moment when everything she thought she knew about love and trust and the man she'd married revealed itself to be an elaborate performance designed to hide the truth about who he really was. Chapter C3: Confronting the Truth. The heaviest burden isn't the secret itself. It's carrying the knowledge that the person you trusted most has been living a lie so complete that even their love might be a performance. Layla drove through Manhattan in a daze, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white as she replayed every moment of her marriage through the devastating lens of new knowledge. The pregnancy test sat in her purse like a ticking bomb, while Gabriel's photograph was burned into her memory, those emerald right eyes staring at her with innocent trust, unaware that his father had built an entire life on pretending he didn't exist. The city blurred past her windows in streaks of steel and glass, but all she could see was the face of an 8-year-old boy she'd never met, who was fighting for his life while his father lived in luxury just a few hundred miles away. Every red light became an opportunity to study Gabriel's features in the photograph Charles had given her, searching for traces of the man she'd thought she knew completely. By the time she reached their penthouse, her shock had crystallized into something harder and more dangerous, a cold fury that came from being thoroughly and completely betrayed by the person she'd trusted most in the world. The doorman's friendly greeting felt surreal, as if she were viewing her old life through glass, already separated from the woman who'd left this building just 2 hours ago, believing her marriage was built on truth and mutual devotion. Liam was in his study, probably handling Wright Industries' business with the same careful attention to detail he'd apparently applied to hiding his son's existence for 8 years. The normalcy of it, her husband conducting business calls while their world crumbled around them, felt like another betrayal, proof of how completely he'd compartmentalized his deception. "How was your meeting with Charles?" Liam called out as she entered the apartment, his voice warm with the casual affection of a man who had no idea his world was about to end. "Was it as mind-numbingly boring as you expected?" For a moment, Layla stood frozen in their entryway, looking at the life they'd built together, the photographs of their wedding day that lined the console table, the art they'd chosen together during weekend gallery walks, the furniture that told the story of their shared dreams and careful negotiations about style and comfort. All of it felt like a museum exhibit now, artifacts from a marriage that had never really existed. "Liam," she said quietly, her voice carrying a tone he'd never heard before, something arctic and final that cut through the comfortable domesticity of their afternoon routine. "We need to talk, right now." Something in her voice must have alerted him to danger, because she heard his chair scrape against the floor, heard his footsteps moving quickly toward the living room. When he appeared in the doorway, his face already marked with concern, she saw him as if for the first time, not as her devoted husband, but as a man capable of breathtaking deception, someone who could look her in the eyes every morning and lie with the skill of a professional actor. "Baby, what's wrong?" he asked, moving toward her with the same gentle approach he might use with a wounded animal. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Layla said, pulling Gabriel's photograph from her purse and holding it up like evidence in a trial. "I've seen a ghost named Gabriel Sullivan. Your son, Liam. The child you've been hiding from me for 3 years." The color drained from Liam's face, so completely she thought he might collapse right there on their Italian marble floor. He stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the photograph of his son, as if seeing him through her eyes for the first time. And she watched the careful mask of innocence crumble away, to reveal the guilt he'd been carrying like a physical weight. His hands began to shake as the full implications of discovery crashed over him, not just the exposure of his secret, but the recognition that his carefully constructed life was about to crumble. She could see him calculating damage, weighing options, trying to find words that might somehow minimize the devastation of what she'd learned. "Layla, I can explain," he said, but his voice was hollow, defeated. The voice of a man who'd always known this moment would come. "It's not. It's more complicated than you think." "Complicated?" Layla's voice rose with 3 years of suppressed intuition, finally finding release. "You have an 8-year-old son who's dying of leukemia, and you've been pretending he doesn't exist while building a life with me. What part of that is complicated, Liam? What part of that isn't exactly what it looks like?" The accusation hung in the air between them like a physical barrier, and she watched Liam's face cycle through emotions, shock at being discovered, fear of losing everything, and underneath it all, the terrible relief of someone whose lies had finally been exposed. Liam sank onto their sofa as if his legs could no longer support the weight of his deception. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked older than his 34 years, aged by secrets and guilt and the terrible knowledge that his carefully constructed life was crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. "How did you find out?" he asked quietly, and the fact that his first question wasn't a denial told her everything she needed to know about the depth of his betrayal. "Emma Sullivan contacted Charles Morrison," Layla said, her voice gaining strength as her shock transformed into righteous anger. "She's been trying to reach you for 6 months because your son needs a bone marrow transplant, and you're his only hope. But apparently you've made sure she can never actually speak to you." Liam's head dropped into his hands, and she could see his shoulders shaking with something that might have been grief or might have been relief at finally being caught. The sight of his breakdown should have moved her to compassion, but all she felt was cold fury at the scope of his deception. "I never meant for it to go on this long," he said, his voice muffled and broken. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," Layla said fiercely, moving to stand over him like an avenging angel of truth. "You got a woman pregnant, abandoned her without explanation, and then spent 8 years pretending your child didn't exist while sending guilt money to ease your conscience. And through all of that, you looked me in the eyes every single day and lied to me about who you really are." Each word was designed to cut, to force him to confront the full scope of what he'd done to Gabriel, to Emma, and to her. She wanted him to feel the weight of his choices, to understand that his cowardice had damaged multiple lives and continued to damage them with each day of denial. "I love you," Liam said desperately, looking up at her with tears streaming down his face, his eyes wild with the fear of losing everything that mattered to him. "Layla, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone or anything. You have to believe that. Everything between us is real. How can I believe anything you say?" Layla asked, her own tears finally starting to fall as the reality of her shattered trust hit her with full force. "If you could hide something this huge, this important for 3 years, what else are you hiding? What other children do you have scattered around the country? What other women are waiting for you to finally do the right thing?" "There's no one else," Liam said urgently, reaching for her hands, but she stepped back as if his touch would burn her. "Gabriel is my only child. Emma is the only woman I ever—" "Layla, please let me explain. Let me tell you what really happened." "A little boy is dying," Layla said, her voice breaking with the weight of Gabriel's situation and her own shattered faith. "Your son is fighting for his life in a Boston hospital, and his mother has been begging you for help while you've been playing house with me." "How do you explain that, Liam? How do you justify letting a child suffer because acknowledging him might inconvenience your new life?" The accusation hit him like a physical blow, and she saw the exact moment when he stopped trying to defend himself and started facing the full scope of what he'd done. The man she'd married, charming, loving, seemingly perfect, revealed himself to be someone capable of abandoning his own child to protect his carefully curated image. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as the weight of 8 years of cowardice finally crushed his defenses. "You're absolutely right, and I have no excuse. I was young and scared and selfish, and I've been a coward ever since. Gabriel deserves better. Emma deserves better. And you, God, Layla, you deserve so much better than this." The admission should have felt like progress, but all it did was confirm what she already knew, that the man she'd married was capable of abandoning his own child when love became inconvenient. And if he could do that to Gabriel, what guarantee did she have that he wouldn't do the same to their unborn baby? "I'm pregnant," she said suddenly, the words exploding from her like a confession that could no longer be contained. "I found out 4 days ago, and I've been waiting for the perfect moment to tell you. I was going to make it special, romantic, something we'd remember forever." Liam's face went white again, but this time with a different kind of shock. The recognition that his betrayal had infected not just his past but his future as well. The baby she was carrying would grow up knowing that their father had abandoned their half-brother, that love in the right family came with conditions and escape clauses. "Layla, no. Please tell me you're not—" "I'm 10 weeks pregnant with your baby," she continued ruthlessly, "while your 8-year-old son is dying in Boston. Do you see the problem here, Liam? Do you see how absolutely devastating this situation is?" The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of 2 pregnancies 8 years apart, 2 children whose lives hung in the balance while their father sat paralyzed by his own cowardice. Outside their windows, Manhattan pulsed with life and possibility. But inside their penthouse, everything felt frozen in a moment of reckoning that would determine whether their marriage could survive the weight of truth. "What do you want me to do?" Liam asked finally, his voice hollow with defeat and desperate hope combined. "Tell me what you need me to do to fix this, and I'll do it." Layla looked at the man she'd loved with every fiber of her being, the father of the child growing inside her, and felt her heart break in ways she hadn't known were possible, because the answer to his question would require him to choose between the life he'd built with her and the responsibility he'd abandoned 8 years ago, and she wasn't sure either choice would leave room for the kind of love she'd thought they shared. "I need you to save your son," she said quietly, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach, where their baby grew. And then I need you to explain to me how I'm supposed to trust you with our baby when you were capable of walking away from him. Chapter 4. The Weight of Guilt. There are some truths so devastating they rewrite the past completely, transforming every happy memory into a question mark and every promise into a potential lie. That evening, Liam sat alone in his study while Layla locked herself in their bedroom, the physical distance between them representing an emotional chasm that felt impossible to bridge. The photograph of Gabriel lay on his desk like an accusation, and for the first time in 8 years, he allowed himself to really look at his son, to see the way the boy's eyes crinkled when he smiled, exactly like his own, to notice the stubborn set of his jaw that marked him unmistakably as a right. The room around him felt different now, charged with the weight of exposed secrets and accumulated guilt. His awards and accolades lined the walls: Harvard Business School diploma, community service honors, photographs with politicians and celebrities, but they all felt meaningless now, hollow achievements that paled next to the fundamental failure of abandoning his own child. He'd been 26 when Emma told him she was pregnant, fresh out of Harvard Business School and terrified by the weight of right family expectations pressing down on him like a physical force. His father, Harrison, had already laid out the path for his life with military precision: join the family business, marry within their social circle, produce the next generation of right heirs according to carefully established protocols that had governed their family for generations. Emma Sullivan, brilliant and beautiful but from a working-class Boston family, didn't fit the mold Harrison had cast for his son's future. Her father was a plumber, her mother worked as a school secretary, and while Emma herself was graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School, her lack of social pedigree made her unacceptable in Harrison's carefully ordered world-view. The memory of that night still burned in his chest like acid, Emma glowing with happiness as she shared their news, talking about baby names and nursery colors, while he sat frozen with panic that felt like drowning in ice water. She'd been so beautiful in her joy, so trusting in his love, so completely unaware that he was already calculating how to escape the future she was describing, with such radiant hope. He'd known, even as she spoke about their life together, that he was going to choose his family's approval over his own heart. The knowledge had made him sick with self-loathing, but not sick enough to make a different choice. The right name, the right fortune, the right legacy, it had all seemed too important to risk for love, even love as pure and real as what he'd shared with Emma. Liam, the soft knock on his study door interrupted his self-recrimination.
Can I come in?
He looked up to find Catherine Wright, his mother, standing in the doorway, with the kind of gentle concern that had been his refuge throughout childhood. At 58, she was still elegant and beautiful, but tonight she looked older, worn down by the tension that had filled the penthouse since Layla's return from Charles Morrison's office. "Mom," he said, trying to summon a smile, but failing completely as the weight of his guilt crushed any attempt at normalcy. "I didn't know you were coming by." "Layla called me," Catherine said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the careful grace that had been trained into her from birth. Her movements were precise and controlled, but he could see the strain in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she managed to tell me that there's a child. "Your child," the disappointment in his mother's voice was worse than anger would have been. Catherine Wright had spent 30 years managing the Wright family's public image, smoothing over Harrison's occasional scandals and protecting the family reputation with skill that bordered on artistry. But she'd never had to deal with the discovery that her own son had abandoned a child. "Gabriel," Liam said quietly, testing his son's name on his lips for the first time in years. The name felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. His name is Gabriel, and he's 8 years old, and he's dying because I was too much of a coward to be his father. Catherine's hand flew to her throat, her face pale with shock and something that looked like grief for the grandson she'd never known existed. Dying, Liam? What do you mean he's dying? Leukemia, Liam said, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and his mother has been trying to contact me for 6 months because I might be his only hope. She's desperate. Mum, she's watching her son die while I've been playing happy families with Layla. The silence that followed was heavy with 34 years of accumulated love and disappointment. Catherine Wright had raised her son to be better than this, had taught him about honor and responsibility and the weight of the right name. To discover that he'd failed so completely in the most basic duty of fatherhood was devastating in ways that went beyond personal betrayal. "Tell me what happened," Catherine said softly, her voice carrying the authority of a mother who would accept nothing less than complete honesty. "Tell me how you could abandon your own child." So Liam told her everything about Emma's pregnancy announcement and his panic at disappointing his father, about the cowardly way he'd simply stopped returning her calls and disappeared from her life like a ghost. He told her about the private investigator he'd hired to track Emma down after Gabriel's birth, about the monthly payments he'd been sending anonymously, about the photographs he'd commissioned showing Gabriel's birthdays and first days of school, images of a life he'd chosen to observe from a distance rather than participate in directly. "I told myself I was protecting him," Liam said, his voice breaking with 8 years of accumulated self-justification, crumbling under the weight of truth. "I convinced myself that he was better off without me, that Emma would find someone who could love them both properly. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was protecting my inheritance, my position in the family, my comfortable life that never had to accommodate the inconvenience of responsibility." Catherine listened in silence, her face cycling through emotions too complex to catalogue. Grief for the grandson she'd never known existed, anger at her son's cowardice, heartbreak for the woman who'd raised a child alone, while his father sent money like it could replace love and presence and the thousand small moments that defined real parenthood. "And now, he's sick," she said finally, her voice hollow with the recognition that time had run out for easy solutions or gradual reconciliation. "Now your son is fighting for his life, and you have another child on the way with Layla." "She's pregnant," Liam confirmed, the words carrying equal measures of joy and terror. 10 weeks along, and she found out the same day she learned about Gabriel. Can you imagine what she's going through? "She's carrying my baby while processing the fact that I abandoned my first child." "What are you going to do?" Catherine asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be inadequate to the scope of the damage he'd caused. "I don't know," Liam admitted, the helplessness in his voice reflecting the complete collapse of his carefully controlled life. "Charles Morrison gave me Emma's contact information, but how do I call her? How do I explain 8 years of silence? How do I tell my dying son that his father has been alive and wealthy and choosing not to be part of his life?" Catherine rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had been the backdrop to the Wright family's rise to power over 4 generations. The city lights twinkled below them like fallen stars, beautiful and distant and somehow accusatory in their brightness. "You call her," she said simply, her voice carrying the strength that had sustained her through 3 decades of marriage to Harrison Wright. "You get on a plane to Boston tonight, and you do whatever it takes to save that little boy's life. And then you spend the rest of your life making up for the 8 years you stole from him. What about Layla?" Liam asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "What about our marriage, our baby? How do I ask her to forgive something this massive?" Catherine turned from the window to look at her son with eyes that held both love and disappointment in equal measure. "You don't ask for forgiveness, Liam, you earn it. You prove to her that the man who could abandon one child has become someone worthy of raising another. You show her that the father Gabriel deserves is the same father your new baby will get. And if she can't forgive me, Liam asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at him since Layla had shown him Gabriel's photograph. If this destroys our marriage completely, then you learn to live with the consequences of your choices, Catherine said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. But you save that little boy first. Whatever happens between you and Layla, Gabriel doesn't deserve to pay the price for your mistakes. As his mother left him alone with his guilt and his fears, Liam picked up his phone and stared at Emma Sullivan's number for a long time. Somewhere in Boston, his son was fighting for his life, while his mother wondered if the father who'd abandoned them would finally find the courage to come home. And in their bedroom, Layla was carrying his second child while trying to process the fact that her marriage had been built on a foundation of lies and abandoned responsibility. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as he finally dialed Emma's number, preparing to speak to the woman he'd loved and abandoned for the first time in 8 years, knowing that the conversation ahead would either begin his redemption or complete his destruction. Chapter 5. Mothers and Secrets. A mother's love is a force that transcends time and betrayal, but it can also be a weapon that cuts deeper than any blade when wielded by someone who trusted you to be better than you chose to be. The phone rang 3 times before Emma Sullivan's voice answered, and Liam felt 8 years of carefully suppressed guilt crash over him like a tidal wave. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, warm, intelligent, with the slight Boston accent that had charmed him during their Harvard days, but now it carried undertones of exhaustion and desperation that he'd put there through his abandonment. "Hello?" Emma said, and he could hear the wariness in her voice, the kind of caution that came from months of unanswered calls and systematic rejection from the man she'd once loved enough to plan a future with. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands shaking as he gripped the phone like a lifeline to a past he'd tried to erase. "It's Liam Wright." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with 8 years of unanswered questions and accumulating hurt that had hardened into protective scar tissue. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, professional in the way people sounded when they were trying not to break down completely. "I've been calling you for 6 months, she said quietly, and he could hear the weight of endless sleepless nights and hospital vigils in those simple words. "Gabriel asks about his father sometimes, and I never know what to tell him. I've been protecting you, making excuses for you, telling him that sometimes daddies have to work very far away and can't come home." The accusation in her voice was worse than screaming would have been. Emma Sullivan had spent 8 years being both mother and father to their son, had shouldered the responsibility Liam had abandoned while still protecting his image in their child's mind. The generosity of spirit that had allowed her to do that made his own cowardice seem even more despicable. "Emma, I'm sorry," he said, the words pathetically inadequate for the scope of what he'd done to her and to Gabriel. "I know that doesn't begin to cover what I've put you through, but I need you to know that I've thought about you and Gabriel every single day for 8 years. Thinking about us isn't the same as being here," Emma replied, her voice cracking slightly with the strain of 8 years of carrying alone a burden meant for 2 people. "It isn't the same as holding him when he cries, or cheering at his soccer games, or staying up all night when he has nightmares. Your guilt doesn't help him with his homework, or explain why he doesn't have a daddy like the other kids." Each word hit him like a physical blow, painting a picture of the life he'd chosen not to participate in, soccer games and nightmares and homework and all the small, crucial moments that made up a childhood. He'd been living in luxury while his son learned to navigate the world without a father, had been building a fairy tale marriage while Emma struggled alone with the challenges of single motherhood. "I know," he said, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his failures crashed over him like an avalanche. "I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but Gabriel is sick and I want to help. I want to do whatever it takes to save him." "He's not just sick, Liam," Emma said, her voice breaking completely as the carefully maintained composure of 8 years finally cracked. "He's dying. The leukemia is aggressive, and he's not responding to conventional treatment. The doctors say a bone marrow transplant is his only chance, and I've been tested. His grandparents have been tested. Everyone in our family has been tested. None of us are matches." The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking, the sound of a mother watching her child slip away, while medical science offered only one hope, the father who'd abandoned them both. Liam closed his eyes and tried to imagine what Emma had gone through, sitting in hospital rooms and receiving test results, and facing the reality that she might lose her son because his father was too selfish to be found. "I'll be tested," Liam said immediately, his voice carrying the conviction of a man who'd finally found his courage. "I'll fly to Boston tonight, and I'll be tested first thing in the morning. And if I'm not a match, I'll find someone who is. My whole family will be tested, my parents, my cousins, everyone with right blood. We'll find Gabriel a donor. Your family." Emma's voice carried a bitter laugh that cut him to the bone. "The same family that was too good for me 8 years ago. The Wrights are going to help save the grandchild they don't acknowledge exists." The accusation stung because it was true. Harrison Wright would be horrified to discover his son had fathered a child with someone outside their social circle, would see Gabriel as a threat to the family's carefully maintained image rather than a grandson deserving of love and protection. "They'll help," Liam said with more conviction than he felt, knowing that convincing his father would be a battle that might tear the Wright family apart. "Whatever my father's reaction, they'll help save Gabriel. I'll make sure of it." "There's something else," Emma said quietly, her voice dropping to a whisper that made his heart race with fresh dread. "Gabriel knows about you. He's known since he was 6 that his father is someone named Liam Wright who lives in New York, and he's been asking to meet you since he got sick." The knowledge hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. His son knew his name, had been wondering about him, had been hoping for 8 years that his father might someday come home. All the justifications Liam had used to rationalize his absence crumbled in the face of this simple truth. Gabriel wanted his father, had always wanted his father, and Liam had been too selfish to give him that basic human connection. "What did you tell him?" Liam asked, though he wasn't sure he could handle the answer. "I told him that his daddy loved him very much but lived very far away," Emma said, tears evident in her voice as she recounted 8 years of protective lies. "I told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but that doesn't mean the love isn't real. I've been protecting your image for 8 years, Liam, even when you didn't deserve it." The generosity of her protection was staggering. The kind of selfless love that put their child's emotional well-being above her own hurt and anger. Emma Sullivan had raised their son to love his absent father, despite having every reason to poison that relationship with the truth about Liam's abandonment. "Can I see him?" Liam asked, his voice barely audible as hope and terror warred in his chest. "When I come to Boston, can I meet my son?" "He's scared," Emma warned, her voice carrying the protective instincts of a mother preparing to shield her child from disappointment. "He's 8 years old, and he's been through hell with the treatments, and he doesn't understand why his father never visited before he got sick. You're going to have to earn his trust just like you're going to have to earn mine." "I understand," Liam said, though he wasn't sure he understood anything anymore, except that he'd wasted 8 years of his son's life and might not have many chances left to make it right. "Emma, I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I was young and stupid and terrified of disappointing my family. But I never stopped loving you or regretting the choice I made." "Love isn't enough, Liam," Emma said firmly. her voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd learned to survive on her own strength. Love doesn't keep the lights on, or pay for medical bills, or hold a scared little boy's hand in the hospital. Love doesn't explain to a child why his father disappeared without saying goodbye. The conversation ended with plans for Liam to fly to Boston the next morning, arrangements for testing that might save his son's life, and the terrible knowledge that 8 years of absence couldn't be undone with money or apologies or even bone marrow compatibility. As he hung up the phone, Liam found Layla standing in the doorway of his study, her face streaked with tears and her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. She'd heard enough of the conversation to understand what he was planning, and the look in her eyes was a mixture of pride and heartbreak that nearly destroyed him. "You're going to Boston," she said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "I have to," Liam replied, moving toward her slowly, not sure if she would let him close enough to touch. "Gabriel is dying, and I'm his only hope. Whatever happens between us, I can't let my son die because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done." Layla nodded, and for a moment he saw a glimpse of the woman who'd fallen in love with him, generous, forgiving, capable of seeing the potential for redemption even in the darkest situations. But then her hand moved to her stomach again, and he saw the fear in her eyes as she contemplated whether the man who'd abandoned one child could be trusted with another. "When you come back," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of their entire future, "we need to talk about us, about whether there's a way forward from this, or whether our marriage was just another performance you've been giving for 3 years. As she walked away, leaving him alone with his guilt and his phone calls to make and his hastily packed bags, Liam realized that saving his son's life might be the easy part. Learning to live with the consequences of his choices and proving to both Emma and Layla that he'd finally become the man his children deserved might take the rest of his life. But Gabriel was dying, and for the first time in 8 years, Liam finally understood that being a father meant more than providing financial support from a distance. It meant showing up even when you were scared, especially when you were scared. The flight to Boston couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 6: Facing the Sun. The moment a coward finally chooses courage, they discover that bravery doesn't erase the past. It only offers the possibility of writing a different future. The pediatric oncology ward at Boston Children's Hospital smelled like antiseptic and hope and the particular kind of sadness that hangs in places where children fight for their lives. Liam walked down the hallway beside Emma, his heart hammering against his ribs as they approached the room where his son was, awaiting the child he'd thought about every day for 8 years but had never had the courage to meet. The hospital corridors were decorated with children's artwork, bright paintings of rainbows and dinosaurs and superhero adventures that spoke of young imaginations refusing to be diminished by illness. But underneath the cheerful veneer, Liam could sense the weight of accumulated grief, the echo of families who'd walked these halls, carrying hopes that had been fulfilled or shattered with equal measure. "He's small for his age," Emma warned quietly, her voice carrying the protective instincts of a mother preparing to shield her child from disappointment. "The treatments have been hard on him, and he gets tired easily. But he's excited to meet you, so please don't hurt him any more than you already have." The accusation in her words was gentle but devastating, a reminder that every choice he'd made for 8 years had shaped Gabriel's understanding of what fathers were supposed to be. Liam had been a ghost in his son's life, present in DNA and financial support, but absent in every way that actually mattered to a growing child. "Emma," Liam said, stopping just outside Gabriel's room, his voice heavy with 8 years of accumulated regret. "I need you to know that I'm going to make this right. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to be the father he deserves from now on." Emma studied his face with the intensity of a woman who'd learned not to trust promises from men who'd already proven their capacity for abandonment. Her brown eyes were tired but determined, marked by years of carrying responsibility that should have been shared but had fallen entirely on her shoulders. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of 8 years of disappointment. He's already been let down enough by the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. Then she opened the door, and Liam saw his son for the first time. Gabriel was small, as Emma had warned, made smaller by the hospital bed that seemed to swallow his thin frame. A knit cap covered his head, where chemotherapy had stolen his hair. But his eyes, those unmistakable right emerald eyes, were bright with curiosity and hope as they focused on the stranger in the doorway. He looked like Liam had at 8, but with Emma's gentle mouth and an expression of quiet bravery that spoke of battles no child should have to fight. The resemblance was startling and immediate, not just in physical features, but in the way Gabriel held himself, the intelligent alertness in his gaze. The stubborn set of his jaw that marked him unmistakably as a right, despite 8 years of separation from his father's influence. "Daddy," Gabriel said softly, the word carrying 8 years of questions and dreams, and the simple faith of a child who still believed his father might be good enough to love. Liam felt his knees nearly buckle as the reality of his son's existence hit him with full force. This wasn't a photograph or a fantasy or a problem to be managed with money and distance. This was a real little boy who was sick and scared and had been waiting his entire life for his father to come home. "Hi, Gabriel," Liam said, moving slowly toward the bed as if approaching something precious and fragile. His voice was rough with emotion, 8 years of suppressed love finally finding expression. Yes, I'm your daddy. I'm so sorry it took me so long to come see you." Gabriel's face lit up with a smile that was pure joy, despite the circumstances. And Liam saw himself in that expression, the same enthusiasm, the same capacity for happiness that had defined his own childhood before the weight of right expectations began to crush his spirit. "Mommy said you lived very far away," Gabriel said, his voice thin but clear, marked by the kind of maturity that came from facing mortality at an age when most children worried only about playground politics. "She said that's why you couldn't visit, but that you thought about me all the time." Liam shot a grateful look at Emma, understanding now how she'd protected him in their son's mind, how she'd given Gabriel a fantasy father who was distant but loving, rather than the truth about abandonment and cowardice. The generosity of that protection was staggering, and it made his own failures seem even more inexcusable. "I did think about you," Liam said, settling carefully on the edge of Gabriel's bed, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch his son for the first time. "Every single day, I wondered what you were doing, whether you were happy, what games you liked to play. I have pictures of you from when you were little, and I could see how smart and brave you were." "You have pictures of me?" Gabriel's eyes widened with wonder at the idea that his absent father had been collecting evidence of his life. "Can I see them?" Liam pulled out his phone. Navigating to the folder of images he'd commissioned over the years, Gabriel's first steps, his first day of school, birthday parties and soccer games, and all the moments Liam had witnessed from a distance, like a ghost haunting his own son's childhood. As they scrolled through the photos together, Gabriel providing commentary on each memory, Liam felt the weight of 8 years of missed opportunities settling on his shoulders like lead. "I remember that," Gabriel said, pointing to a photo of his 5th birthday party with the excitement of a child reliving a cherished memory. "That was when Mommy made me a castle cake and I got to wear the crown. Were you watching from somewhere?" The innocent question was like a knife to Liam's heart, revealing the depth of Gabriel's hope that his father had been somehow present during the important moments of his childhood. "No, buddy," he said quietly, his voice cracking with grief for all the moments he'd voluntarily missed. "I wasn't there. I should have been, but I wasn't brave enough to come see you. That was my mistake, not yours." Gabriel studied his father's face with the serious intensity of a child trying to understand adult complications that didn't fit into his worldview of right and wrong. "Are you brave enough now?" he asked simply, the question carrying more weight than any courtroom cross-examination. "I'm trying to be," Liam said, his voice breaking with 8 years of accumulated regret and newfound determination. "I'm here now, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you get better. We're going to find out if my bone marrow can help you, and if it can't, we'll find someone whose can." "What's bone marrow?" Gabriel asked, and Liam found himself explaining medical procedures to an 8-year-old who'd already learned more about hospitals and treatments than most adults would ever need to know. They talked for hours about Gabriel's favorite subjects in school, science and art, his best friend, a boy named Tyler who was also fighting cancer, his hopes for the future, becoming a doctor who helps kids like him. With each revelation, Liam felt the scope of what he'd missed expanding like a wound in his chest. Gabriel was funny and intelligent and thoughtful, with interests and opinions and dreams that had developed completely outside of his father's influence. "I want to be a doctor like the ones who take care of me," Gabriel said, his voice growing tired, but his eyes still bright with plans for a future he might not live to see. "So I can help other kids who get sick and scared. Tyler says I'd be a good doctor because I know what it feels like." The maturity in his son's voice was heartbreaking. An 8-year-old boy who'd learned to find purpose in his own suffering, who wanted to transform his pain into healing for others. It was a perspective that humbled Liam completely, showing him what real courage looked like compared to his own years of hiding from responsibility. "Daddy," Gabriel said as the afternoon wore on, his voice growing tired, but his eyes still bright with wonder at finally meeting his father. "Are you going to stay this time, or do you have to go back to the faraway place?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 8 years of abandonment and the possibility of a different future. Liam looked at his son, this brave little boy who was fighting for his life while still having the capacity to hope for his father's love, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. "I'm going to stay as long as you need me," Liam said, taking Gabriel's small hand in his own and marveling at how fragile life could be. "I'm going to be here for the tests and the treatments and whatever comes next. And after you get better, I'm going to come visit you all the time. Or maybe you can come visit me in New York. Would you like that?" "Can I see where you live?" Gabriel asked, his eyes lighting up with the possibility of adventures beyond the hospital walls. "Mommy says New York has really tall buildings and taxis that are yellow." "It does," Liam confirmed, already imagining showing Gabriel the penthouse, taking him to Central Park, introducing him to all the places that had defined his own childhood. "And you can see it all as soon as you're feeling better." As the evening approached and Gabriel began to drift towards sleep, exhausted by the excitement of meeting his father and the ongoing battle his small body was fighting, Liam sat by his son's bedside and watched the rise and fall of his thin chest. The monitors around Gabriel's bed beeped quietly, measuring heartbeats and oxygen levels and all the clinical indicators of a life hanging in the balance. "Thank you," Emma said quietly from the doorway, where she'd been watching their reunion with careful eyes. "For coming, for being gentle with him, for not making promises you can't keep." "I'm going to keep them all," Liam said firmly, looking up at the woman who'd raised his son alone while he built a life based on pretending they didn't exist. "Every promise I made to him today, every commitment I make going forward, I'm going to be the father he deserves, even if it takes the rest of my life to prove it." As he held Gabriel's hand and watched his son sleep, Liam thought about Layla back in New York, carrying their second child while processing the reality of his first. He thought about the life they'd built together and the trust he'd shattered, about the possibility that saving one relationship might cost him another. But looking at Gabriel's peaceful face, seeing the trust and hope there despite 8 years of abandonment, Liam knew that some choices were bigger than personal happiness. Some mistakes required a lifetime of redemption, and some loves, like the love between a father and child, were worth any sacrifice to make right. The boy sleeping in the hospital bed was his son, and for the first time in 8 years, Liam was finally ready to be his father. Chapter 7. Family Reckonings. When a family's foundation cracks, every secret comes rushing to the surface like water through broken stone, and there's no choosing which truths will destroy and which will heal. Harrison Wright stood in his son's penthouse apartment like a conquering general surveying hostile territory, his steel-grey eyes taking in every detail while his face remained a mask of controlled displeasure. He'd returned from his business trip to Geneva to find his daughter-in-law in tears, his son missing in action in Boston, and the carefully maintained Wright family image teetering on the edge of a public relations disaster. The apartment felt different without Liam's presence. Emptier, charged with tension and unspoken accusations. Family photographs lined the console tables, showing 3 years of Wright family gatherings where Gabriel had been conspicuously absent. Events that now felt like elaborate charades, designed to hide the truth about Liam's abandoned responsibilities. "Explain this to me again," Harrison demanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never been denied anything he wanted. "My son has abandoned his wife to chase after some woman from his college days?" Layla sat on the sofa, where just days ago she'd been planning to share her pregnancy news, with joy and anticipation, now feeling like a defendant in a trial where the evidence against her husband grew more damaging by the hour. Catherine Wright sat beside her, having appointed herself as both ally and translator between Harrison's fury and Layla's heartbreak. "It's not another woman." "Harrison," Catherine said firmly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone in the room. "It's his son. Liam has an 8-year-old son who's dying of leukemia, and he's finally doing what he should have done years ago." The words hit Harrison like a physical blow, his carefully controlled expression cracking to reveal the shock and calculation beneath. His face went white, then red, then settled into the kind of cold fury that had built the Wright fortune through generations of calculated ruthlessness. "Son," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "My son has a child he never told us about. Gabriel," Layla said quietly, pulling out the photograph Charles Morrison had given her and sliding it across the coffee table toward her father-in-law. "His name is Gabriel Sullivan, and he looks exactly like Liam did at that age." Harrison stared at the photograph for a long moment, and Layla watched his expression cycle through disbelief, recognition, and finally a kind of calculating assessment that made her stomach turn. She could practically see him weighing the potential damage to the right name against the possible advantages of having another heir, however inconveniently acquired. "This is a disaster," Harrison said finally, sinking into his chair as the full scope of the situation became clear. "A bastard child with some nobody from Boston. Do you have any idea what the society pages will do with this information?" A child, Harrison," Catherine corrected sharply, her voice carrying 3 decades of suppressed anger at her husband's priorities. "Your grandson is dying, and you're worried about what people will say at the country club." But Harrison was already in damage control mode, his mind racing through the implications and potential solutions with the efficiency of a man who'd spent 40 years protecting the Wright family's reputation. The humanitarian crisis of Gabriel's illness was secondary to the public relations nightmare of acknowledging an illegitimate grandchild. "How long has Liam known about this boy?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying the sharp precision of a lawyer cross-examining a hostile witness. "Has he been supporting them?" Are there legal documents establishing paternity? He's been sending money anonymously for 8 years, Layla said, watching Harrison's face carefully for his reaction. But he never acknowledged Gabriel publicly. He never even spoke to him until yesterday. Good, Harrison said, and the relief in his voice made Layla want to slap him across his perfectly groomed face. Then there's no official connection. We can control this situation, manage the narrative. Anonymous donations can be explained as charity work, part of the Wright Foundation's mission to help underprivileged children. You want to cover it up? Layla asked, incredulous at the depths of Harrison's callousness. Your grandson is fighting for his life, and you want to pretend he doesn't exist. I want to protect this family, Harrison snapped, his mask of civility finally slipping completely. Do you have any idea what acknowledging this child would do to the right name? What it would do to our business relationships, our social standing, our political connections? Ooh, who cares? Catherine exploded, rising from the sofa with 30 years of accumulated fury finally finding release. Who cares about any of that when there's a little boy who needs his grandfather's help? When there's a child who could die because you're more concerned with appearances than with family? When the fight that followed was spectacular in its intensity, 30 years of buried resentments and conflicting priorities erupting like a dam bursting under pressure. Harrison accused Catherine of being naive about the realities of their world, while she accused him of being heartless about the needs of his own family. They screamed at each other with the passion of people who'd been pretending compatibility for decades, while slowly growing to hate what the other represented. You care more about your reputation than your own grandson's life, Catherine shouted, her voice carrying the weight of every compromise she'd made, every time she'd stayed silent when she should have spoken up. And you care more about sentiment than survival. Harrison shot back. Do you think our money just magically appears? Do you think the right name means nothing? Everything we have, everything Liam stands to inherit, is built on respect and reputation. Through it all, Layla sat in stunned silence, one hand pressed protectively over her stomach where her own child grew, watching her in-laws destroy their marriage over the question of whether Gabriel deserved to be acknowledged as part of their family. The baby inside her seemed to move restlessly, as if sensing the chaos in the world they would soon be born into. Enough, Layla finally shouted, her voice cutting through the argument like a knife. Both of you just stop. While you're fighting about public relations and family honor, there's an 8-year-old boy in a hospital bed who might die because none of you can agree on whether he deserves to live. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Catherine's quiet sobbing and Harrison's labored breathing as he tried to regain his composure. Layla looked between them, these two people who'd shaped Liam's understanding of what family meant, and felt a crushing sadness for the child she was carrying. Gabriel is going to be tested as a potential bone marrow donor, Layla announced, her voice carrying a strength she didn't know she possessed. If he's a match, he'll donate his bone marrow to save his brother's life. If he's not, then every member of this family will be tested until we find someone who is. Absolutely not, Harrison said immediately, his voice carrying the finality of a man accustomed to having his decisions treated as law. I won't have the Wright family dragged into this medical circus. We'll pay for the boy's treatment, find the best doctors, hire private medical teams, but we will not publicly acknowledge— You'll acknowledge him, Layla interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of a mother protecting her children, both the one in her womb and the one fighting for his life in Boston. Because Gabriel isn't just Liam's son. He's my stepson. He's this baby's half-brother. And I will not allow my children to grow up in a family that treats love and loyalty as public relations problems. The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. If Harrison wanted access to his legitimate grandchild, he would have to accept his illegitimate one as well. It was a gamble born of desperation and righteous anger, but as Layla watched Harrison's face cycle through fury and calculation, She knew it was the only leverage she had. "If this gets out," Harrison said finally, his voice heavy with defeat and barely controlled rage, "if this becomes a public spectacle that damages the right name, I'll hold you personally responsible." "Fine," Layla said, rising from the sofa with the dignity of a queen, dismissing a subject. "But first, we save Gabriel's life. Everything else is just details." As Harrison stormed out of the apartment, leaving Catherine crying on the sofa and Layla standing alone in the wreckage of a family meeting, she felt the baby move again, a flutter of life that reminded her why she was fighting so hard for a future that seemed increasingly impossible to achieve. Somewhere in Boston, Liam was learning to be a father to the son he'd abandoned, while she stood in their empty apartment, trying to figure out if their marriage could survive the weight of his deception. The Wright family was fracturing along lines of loyalty and love, and she wasn't sure any of them would survive the earthquake that was coming. But Gabriel would survive. Whatever else happened, whatever the cost to their marriage or their family or their carefully constructed lives, that little boy would live to grow up and forgive or not. Forgive the father who'd finally found the courage to come home. Chapter 8. Breaking Point. The human. Heart can endure almost anything except the moment when hope and fear collide with such force that the choice between love and self-preservation becomes too close to call. 2 weeks later, Liam stood in the corridor outside Boston Children's Hospital's bone marrow transplant unit, his hands shaking as he waited for the test results that would determine whether he could save his son's life. The past 14 days had been a whirlwind of medical consultations, genetic testing, and the devastating realization that being Gabriel's father meant more than just sharing DNA. It meant accepting responsibility for 8 years of missed birthdays, forgotten bedtime stories, and the kind of casual abandonment that left permanent scars on a child's understanding of what love meant. The hospital corridors had become as familiar as his own home during these 2 weeks of daily visits. He'd learned the names of nurses and orderlies, had memorized the schedule of shift changes, had discovered which vending machines had the best coffee and which waiting rooms offered the most privacy for the difficult conversations that seemed to happen daily. Gabriel had good days and bad days, his small body fighting both the leukemia and the harsh treatments designed to keep him alive long enough for a transplant. On good days, they played card games and read stories and talked about the future with the kind of hope that children maintained even in the darkest circumstances. On bad days, Liam held his son's hand while Gabriel slept, whispering apologies and promises and love that should have been expressed years earlier. "Mr. Wright?" Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the laboratory with a manila folder that contained either salvation or another dead end in Gabriel's fight for survival. Her expression was carefully neutral, trained by years of delivering news that could either save families or destroy them. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs as he followed the doctor into a small consultation room where Emma was already waiting. Her face pale with exhaustion and the kind of hope that had been systematically crushed too many times to feel safe anymore. The past 2 weeks had been difficult for all of them, but Emma bore the additional burden of watching Liam bond with their son while she processed 8 years of abandonment and betrayal. "The results are complicated," Dr. Chen began, and Liam felt his world tilt on its axis. In medical terminology, complicated was rarely good news. "You're a partial match for Gabriel's bone marrow type, which means there's a chance the transplant could work. But it's not the ideal compatibility we'd hoped for." "What does that mean exactly?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the fear written in every line of her face. "What are Gabriel's chances with a partial match?" Approximately 60% success rate," Dr. Chen explained, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone who'd delivered this kind of news too many times. "Better than no transplant at all, but not the 90% we'd expect from a perfect match. The decision is yours. But I should mention that we're still searching for other potential donors through the National Registry. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of an impossible choice. Risk Gabriel's life on a 60% chance of success, or continue waiting for a perfect match that might never come, while their son grew sicker with each passing day. Emma's hands were trembling as she processed the information. 8 years of single motherhood having taught her to make difficult decisions alone. But this choice felt too enormous for one person to bear. Liam could see the calculation in her eyes. 60% odds versus the certainty of watching Gabriel deteriorate while they waited for better options. "How long do we have to decide?" Liam asked, though every instinct in his body was screaming to do whatever it took to save his child. "Regardless of the odds. Gabriel's condition is deteriorating faster than we'd hoped," Dr. Chen said gently, her voice carrying the weight of medical reality that couldn't be softened with optimism. "If we're going to proceed with the transplant, we need to do it within the next week. Waiting much longer could compromise his ability to survive the procedure itself." As they left the consultation room, Liam felt the crushing weight of being responsible for a decision that could either save or kill his son. Emma walked beside him in silence, both of them processing the reality that 8 years of separation had led to this moment, when the father who'd abandoned his child might be the only person who could save him. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at this hour, filled with the familiar smell of institutional coffee and the hushed conversations of families facing medical crises. They found a corner table where they could speak privately, though neither seemed to know where to begin a conversation about gambling with their child's life. "I'll do it," Liam said finally, stopping in the hallway as the words erupted from him with the force of desperation and love combined. "I'll donate whatever he needs. 60% is better than watching him die." "It's not your decision alone," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying 8 years of accumulated authority as Gabriel's primary parent. "This is my son's life we're gambling with." The possession in her words hit him like a slap. My son, not our son. A reminder that biological connection didn't automatically confer parental rights when those rights had been voluntarily surrendered years earlier. Emma had earned her authority through sleepless nights and hospital vigils and the 1,000 small acts of love that defined real parenthood. "You're right," Liam said, his voice heavy with the recognition that he was still earning the right to make decisions about Gabriel's welfare. "But I'm here now and I want to help. I want to do whatever gives him the best chance. Where were you when he had nightmares about monsters under his bed?" Emma asked, 8 years of suppressed anger finally finding release in the sterile environment of the hospital corridor. "Where were you when he asked why he didn't have a daddy at father-son school events? Where were you when I was working double shifts to pay for his little league registration because your anonymous money orders didn't cover everything a growing boy needed?" Each question was a knife to Liam's heart, painting a picture of the childhood he'd missed and the struggles he'd forced Emma to face alone. He'd been living in luxury while his son learned to navigate disappointment and abandonment. Had been building a fairy tale marriage, while Emma carried the weight of single parenthood without complaint or public recognition. "I can't undo the past," Liam said, tears streaming down his face as the full scope of his failures crashed over him like a tidal wave. "I can't take back the 8 years I stole from all of us, but I'm here now, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did if you'll let me." Emma studied his face with the intensity of a woman who'd learned not to trust promises from men who'd already proven their capacity for disappearing when things got difficult. But then her expression softened slightly, and he saw the exhaustion there, the bone-deep weariness of carrying alone a burden that was too heavy for one person. "He loves you," she said quietly, her voice cracking with the admission that had been building for 2 weeks. "Despite everything, despite 8 years of absence, he loves you completely. Do you know how hard it's been to watch him light up every time you walk into his room? How many nights I've held him while he cried because you weren't there? The knowledge that Gabriel loved him despite his abandonment was both a gift and a condemnation, proof that children's capacity for forgiveness exceeded their parents' capacity for deserving it. Liam thought about his own child, growing in Layla's womb, and wondered if he was destined to repeat the cycle of right men who failed the people who loved them most. "My wife is pregnant," he said suddenly, the confession erupting from him like a dam bursting. "Layla is 14 weeks pregnant with our baby, and she found out about Gabriel the same day she found out about the pregnancy." Emma's face went white with shock and something that looked like grief, the recognition that the man who'd abandoned her child was about to become a father again, potentially learning to love a second child in ways he'd never learned to love the first. "Does she know you're here?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She knows," Liam confirmed. "She's the one who told me I had to come, that I had to do whatever it took to save Gabriel's life. But I don't know if our marriage will survive this. I don't know if she'll ever be able to trust me with our baby when she knows I abandoned my first child." The irony was devastating. He might save one child while losing the chance to raise another, might repair one relationship while destroying the marriage that had given his life meaning and purpose. The weight of those choices felt like it was crushing him from the inside out. "She sounds like a good woman," Emma said quietly, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only the tired recognition of someone who'd learned that life was rarely fair, but sometimes offered unexpected grace. "She is," Liam said. "She's everything good and pure and strong, and I've probably destroyed it all because I was too much of a coward to face the consequences of my choices 8 years ago." As they sat in the hospital cafeteria, two people bound together by love for the same child and separated by 8 years of hurt and abandonment, Liam felt the weight of all his failures settling on his shoulders like a burden he'd carry for the rest of his life. Gabriel might survive. 60% odds were better than nothing, but the collateral damage of his cowardice would echo through generations. His phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "How is Gabriel? How are you? I love you and I'm trying to figure out if that's enough." The message broke his heart with its honesty and its uncertainty, a reminder that love without trust was just another word for hope that might never be fulfilled. As he prepared to text her back, to try to find words that could bridge the chasm of his deception, Gabriel's voice called out from his room down the hall. "Daddy, can you come read me a story?" And Liam realized that some choices were simpler than others. Whatever happened with Layla, whatever the consequences for his marriage and his future, Gabriel needed his father now. The little boy who'd waited 8 years for a bedtime story deserved to have that need met, regardless of the cost to everything else Liam had built his life around. The story could wait. His son could not. Chapter 9. Life hanging in balance. In the space between heartbeats, between hope and despair, between the breath that might be the last and the one that promises tomorrow, every lie we've told ourselves about what matters becomes crystal clear. The transplant procedure was scheduled for 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that felt like the most important day in the history of the world. Liam spent the night before sitting beside Gabriel's hospital bed, watching his son sleep and memorizing every detail of his face in case something went wrong. The preoperative medications had made Gabriel drowsy, but he'd insisted on staying awake long enough to talk to his father about what would happen tomorrow. "Will it hurt?" Gabriel had asked, his voice small but brave, in the way that children learned to be when they'd faced too many medical procedures to remember being truly afraid. "A little," Liam had answered honestly, because 8 years of lying to his son had taught him the value of truth, even when it was frightening. "But the doctors will give you medicine to help with the pain, and I'll be right here when you wake up." "Promise?" Gabriel asked, his emerald eyes so much like Liam's own, searching his father's face for the kind of certainty that adults couldn't actually provide, but children needed to believe in anyway. "I promise," Liam said, taking his son's small hand in his own and marveling at how fragile life could be. How much hope could be contained in 60% odds and the desperate love of parents who would give anything to trade places with their child. Now, as dawn broke over Boston and the hospital began its familiar rhythm of shift changes and medical procedures, Liam sat in the surgical waiting room with Emma, both of them too nervous to speak but too afraid to be alone. The next several hours would determine whether Gabriel lived or died, whether Liam's bone marrow could provide the salvation his son needed, whether 8 years of abandonment could be redeemed by one act of biological generosity. The waiting room was filled with other families facing their own medical crises. Parents clutching coffee cups with shaking hands, grandparents whispering prayers in multiple languages, siblings trying to understand why their brother or sister needed to sleep in the hospital for so long. Each family carried their own burden of hope and fear, their own desperate bargains with whatever gods they believed might be listening. "Mr. and Mrs. Wright?" "Adult." A nurse appeared in the waiting room doorway, and neither Liam nor Emma corrected the assumption about their marital status. In this moment, they were united by love for Gabriel that transcended their complicated history. "We're taking Gabriel into surgery now. You can see him for just a moment before the anesthesia." Gabriel looked impossibly small on the surgical gurney, but his eyes were bright, with the kind of trust that only children could maintain in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. The hospital gown made him look even younger than his 8 years, but there was something in his expression that spoke of wisdom beyond his age. "Hi, Daddy," he said, his voice slightly slurred from the preoperative medications. "Are you ready to give me some of your strong daddy blood?" "I'm ready," Liam said, leaning down to kiss his son's forehead with infinite tenderness. "I'm going to give you all the strong blood you need, and then you're going to get better and come home." "And then can I meet your other baby?" Gabriel asked, his innocent question hitting Liam like a physical blow. In the past 2 weeks, Gabriel had learned about his father's marriage and the half-sibling he would soon have. Information he'd processed with the remarkable adaptability of a child, who'd learned to accept that family came in many different configurations. "Yes," Liam said, his voice cracking with emotion as he imagined a future where both his children could know each other, where Gabriel could be the big brother Liam's new baby would need. "You can meet your little brother or sister, and you can teach them all the things that big brothers know." As they wheeled Gabriel into surgery, Liam felt a part of his heart go with his son, the part that had been absent for 8 years, but was finally desperately present when it mattered most. The doors closed behind the surgical team, leaving Liam and Emma alone in a waiting room that suddenly felt like the entire universe. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Filled with coffee that tasted like cardboard and magazines, neither of them could concentrate on reading. Other families came and went, carrying their own burdens of hope and fear, while Liam and Emma maintained their vigil for the child who had brought them together and torn them apart, and was now fighting for his life in an operating room where strangers held his future in their skilled hands. "I should call Layla," Liam said, pulling out his phone with hands that shook too much to dial properly. "She's been waiting for news about the surgery." Emma nodded, understanding that whatever complicated emotions existed between them, Layla was now part of Gabriel's extended family, the stepmother who'd insisted on fighting for a child she'd never met, who'd forced Harrison Wright to acknowledge a grandson he'd preferred to ignore. "Liam." Layla's voice came through the phone like a lifeline, warm with love and concern despite everything that had fractured between them. "How's Gabriel?" "How are you?" The surgery just started," Liam said, his voice barely under control as the weight of waiting settled on his shoulders. "It could take several hours. Layla, I need you to know that I love you. Whatever happens with us, whatever you decide about our marriage, I love you and our baby more than I've ever loved anything." "I love you too," Layla said softly, and he could hear tears in her voice. "We're going to figure this out, Liam. Gabriel is going to get better, and we're going to find a way to be a family, all of us together." The conversation was brief but healing, a reminder that love could survive even devastating betrayal if both people were willing to do the work of rebuilding trust. As Liam hung up the phone, he realized that Emma had been listening, with the careful attention of someone who understood that Gabriel's future depended on his father's ability to maintain relationships with all the people who loved him. "She sounds good for you," Emma said quietly, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only the tired recognition of someone who'd learned that love wasn't a zero-sum game. "Gabriel talks about her sometimes, about his daddy's wife who wants to meet him." "She does want to meet him," Liam confirmed. "She wants him to be part of our family, part of our baby's life. She's better than I deserve." "Maybe," Emma said with a small smile. "But maybe the point isn't whether you deserve her. Maybe the point is whether you can become someone who does." The afternoon stretched endlessly, marked by periodic updates from surgical nurses who reported that everything was going well but offered no timeline for completion. Gabriel was strong, they said. The procedure was proceeding normally. Dr. Chen would update them as soon as possible. At 4:30, Dr. Chen finally appeared in the waiting room doorway, her scrubs still showing traces of the surgery she'd just completed. Her face was tired but calm, carrying the kind of controlled optimism that surgeons learned to project when families needed hope more than medical honesty. "Mr. Wright, Miss Sullivan," Dr. Chen approached them with measured steps, and Liam felt his heart stop as he prepared to hear news that would either save or destroy his world. "The transplant is complete," Dr. Chen said, and Liam felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "Gabriel came through the surgery beautifully. We won't know for several weeks whether his body will accept the new bone marrow, but the initial signs are very encouraging." Emma sobbed with relief, and Liam found himself crying too. 8 years of guilt and fear and desperate love, finally finding release in tears of gratitude that his son had survived the first hurdle in a long journey toward health. "Can we see him?" Liam asked, needing to confirm with his own eyes that Gabriel was still breathing, still fighting, still the brave little boy who'd waited 8 years for his father to finally come home. "He's in recovery now," Dr. Chen explained. "He'll be sleeping for several more hours, but you can sit with him. And Mr. Wright, what you did today, donating your bone marrow, it took a lot of courage. Gabriel is lucky to have a father who was willing to do whatever it took to save him." As they walked toward Gabriel's recovery room, Liam thought about courage and cowardice, about the 8 years he'd spent running from responsibility, and the moment when running was no longer an option. He thought about Layla, carrying their second child while processing the reality of their first, and about the kind of father he wanted to be for both his children, present, honest, worthy of the trust that children offered so freely and adults found so hard to earn back once it was broken. Gabriel lay in his hospital bed surrounded by machines that monitored every breath and heartbeat, but his color was better than it had been in weeks, and there was something in his peaceful expression that spoke of healing beginning at the cellular level. As Liam took his son's hand and settled into the chair beside his bed, he felt something shift inside himself, the final transformation from the man who could abandon his child to the father Gabriel deserved. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with recovery and rehabilitation, and the delicate work of building relationships that had been fractured by years of absence and deception. But Gabriel was alive, and that was enough for now, enough to build a future on. Enough to hope for forgiveness, enough to believe that love really could conquer the mistakes of the past if you were finally brave enough to face them. Chapter 10. Choosing Love Over Legacy. Some stories end with redemption earned through suffering, and others with the simple recognition that love was always stronger than the fear that tried to destroy it. 3.5 months later, Layla stood in the nursery of their Manhattan penthouse, a hand resting on her rounded belly where their baby grew strong and healthy, watching through the window as Gabriel played in Central Park with Liam. At 24 weeks pregnant, she could feel the baby moving constantly now, gentle kicks and rolls that reminded her daily of the new life that would soon join their complicated but healing family. Gabriel's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The bone marrow transplant had been successful beyond their most optimistic hopes, and now he was healthy enough to make regular trips to New York to spend time with his father and get to know the stepmother who'd fought for his life before they'd ever met. He was a remarkable child, funny and resilient, and possessed of the kind of wisdom that came from facing mortality at an age when most children worried only about homework and friendships. The nursery around her told the story of a family learning to embrace complexity. Traditional blue and white walls were decorated with artwork that Gabriel had made during his recovery, pictures of stick-figure families that included himself, his parents, Layla, and a baby drawn with careful attention to detail. A rocking chair sat by the window, the same chair where Harrison Wright had once sat reading to Liam, now destined to hold another generation of bedtime stories. "He's getting so much stronger," Emma observed from the doorway, where she'd been watching the same scene with the complicated emotions of a mother learning to share her child with the father who'd been absent for 8 years. "The doctors say his blood counts are perfect." Layla turned to face the woman who'd raised Liam's son alone, who'd become an unlikely ally in the process of rebuilding their fractured family. Emma visited New York regularly now, staying in the guest room while Gabriel spent time with his father, and the 3 adults had learned to navigate the delicate dynamics of co-parenting across the wreckage of old hurts and new hopes. "He looks like Liam when he smiles," Layla said, settling into the rocking chair with the careful movements of someone well into their 2nd trimester. "The same mischievous expression when he's planning something he probably shouldn't do. That's definitely a Wright family trait." Emma agreed with a laugh that carried no bitterness, only the tired recognition of someone who'd learned to find humor in the complications of their situation. "Gabriel's been asking if he can teach the baby to play baseball when they're old enough. He's very excited about being a big brother." The relationship between Gabriel and Layla had developed naturally, built on their shared love for Liam and their mutual determination to create a family that could encompass both the past's mistakes and the future's possibilities. Gabriel had accepted her with the open heart of a child who understood that love wasn't limited by biology, and she'd embraced him as the son she'd never had but had always hoped for. "Have you heard from Harrison today?" Emma asked, settling into the window seat with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd become part of their daily routines. "He called this morning," Layla confirmed, smiling at the memory of her father-in-law's awkward but genuine attempt to connect with Gabriel. "He wants to take Gabriel to see the Wright Industries offices next week, show him what the family business looks like. I think he's trying to figure out how to be a grandfather." Harrison's transformation had been perhaps the most surprising aspect of their family's healing process. Faced with the reality of Gabriel's near-death experience and his subsequent recovery, Harrison had gradually let go of his concerns about bloodlines and legitimacy in favor of something more basic: love. For a grandson who was brilliant and brave and undeniably right in all the ways that mattered. "And Catherine?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer from the daily flower deliveries and carefully selected children's books that arrived for Gabriel with clockwork regularity. "She's planning Gabriel's 9th birthday party," Layla said with a warmth that reflected the deep friendship that had developed between the 2 women. "She wants it to be perfect, everything he missed during the years when we didn't know about each other." The sound of laughter from the park drew their attention back to the window, where Gabriel was attempting to teach Liam the finer points of a card game he'd learned during his hospital stays. Father and son sat on a park bench in the afternoon sunshine, their heads bent together over a deck of cards. And the sight filled Layla's heart with gratitude for second chances and the resilience of love. "I need to ask you something," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of a conversation she'd been preparing for weeks. "About when the baby comes. About what role I'll have in all of this." Layla turned to face her fully, understanding the fear behind the question. Emma had spent 8 years as Gabriel's only parent, and now she was learning to share him not just with his father, but with an entire extended family that included a new sibling and all the complications that entailed. "You'll have whatever role you want," Layla said firmly, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd learned that family was something you chose to build every single day. "You're Gabriel's mother, and that makes you family. This baby will know that they have a brother who loves them and a brother's mother who helped raise them, even if it's not traditional." "I never imagined this," Emma admitted, tears gathering in her eyes as she contemplated the unexpected shape their lives had taken. "When I was raising Gabriel alone, I never imagined there could be room for all of us in each other's lives. I thought love was something you had to hoard and protect and fight for." "Maybe it is, sometimes," Layla said thoughtfully, one hand moving in gentle circles over her belly. "But maybe it's also something that grows when you share it. Gabriel has taught me that, how love can expand to include people you never expected to care about." The apartment door opened, and they could hear Liam and Gabriel's voices as they returned from their afternoon in the park, filled with the easy camaraderie that had developed between them over months of careful relationship building. The transformation in their relationship had been remarkable to witness, from the awkward reunion in a hospital room to the natural father-son bond that now defined their interactions. "Layla," Gabriel called out, his voice bright with excitement as he bounded into the nursery. "The baby moved while Daddy was holding your stomach." I felt them kick. Layla smiled as Gabriel approached, with the boundless energy that had returned along with his health, his face glowing with the wonder of feeling his sibling move for the first time. Behind him, Liam appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man who still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. 2 children who loved him despite his past mistakes, a wife who'd chosen forgiveness over fury, a family that had somehow survived the weight of devastating secrets. "The baby knows their big brother is here," Layla said, taking Gabriel's hand and placing it on her belly, where the baby obligingly provided another flutter of movement. "They're going to love having you to protect them and teach them and show them how to be brave." Gabriel's eyes lit up with pride and responsibility as he felt his sibling respond to his presence. "I'm going to teach them everything," he said with the confidence of an 8-year-old who'd learned that love could overcome any obstacle. "How to play cards, and how to be brave when you're scared, and how to make Daddy laugh when he looks sad." As evening settled over Manhattan, the 4 of them sat together in the nursery, Liam and Layla and Gabriel and Emma, an unconventional family, bound together by love and loss, and the determination to do better than the generation before them. Outside the windows, the city pulsed with life and possibility, while inside their home, a new chapter of the Wright family story was being written in the language of redemption and hope. The baby would be born into a family that had learned the difference between legacy and love, between reputation and relationship, between the fear that divided and the courage that healed. Gabriel would grow up knowing that he was wanted and valued and cherished, not despite his complicated origins, but because of the strength and resilience those origins had given him. And Liam, the man who'd once been capable of abandoning his child rather than face disappointment, had become the father both his children deserved. Not because he was perfect, but because he'd finally learned that love was worth any sacrifice, any humiliation, any price required to make things right. The right inheritance would continue, but it would be measured not in dollars or real estate or social standing, but in the love that flowed between generations, in the forgiveness that could heal even the deepest wounds, and in the recognition that family was something you chose to build every single day, one act of love at a time. As Layla felt the baby move again, a strong kick that made her gasp with surprise and joy. She looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The Wright family had been broken by secrets and fear, but it had been rebuilt by truth and love and the simple recognition that some bonds were stronger than the mistakes that tried to destroy them.